The first theory that we're going to talk about comes from Ivan Pavlov. So this was in the 1900s, early 1900s. He was studying digestion in dogs, and he noticed that his laboratory dogs produced saliva before the food was even present. So the dogs learned to associate footsteps with food arriving, so they didn't need to see the food in order to start salivating. This type of learning through associations is called classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is when an individual responds in a particular way to a neutral stimulus. So a stimulus that normally didn't bring about that type of response. So the key feature here is stimulus substitution. So here's an example. And this is with a bell instead of footsteps. So once Ivan Pavlov discovered that his dogs were making associations with footsteps, he wanted to see if he could actually do it on purpose with a bell. So what he did was he gave dogs food, and that would cause them to drool. And then he would ring a bell by itself and nothing would happen. So that's before conditioning. When you hear the word conditioning, you should think of learning. During conditioning, while he's teaching, he would pair the food with the bell over and over and over again, and every single time it would produce the drool because it's paired with the food. Eventually, he took the food away, and just ringing the bell would cause the dog to drool. So that would be after conditioning. A thing to note about classical conditioning is that it is involuntary. So we are not purposefully choosing to behave a certain way. The dogs weren't choosing to drool at the sound of a bell. It's just that we learn associations and react in a certain manner to the stimulus. A couple of the vocabulary terms that you should know are these right here. So a neutral stimulus is a stimulus that doesn't elicit a response. So something like the bell, that they rang it and nothing happened at all. Then we have the unconditioned stimulus. This elicits a response naturally, unconditioned, so without learning. It just happens naturally, like the food elicits drooling without having to be taught to do that. The unconditioned response is the unlearned reaction to the unconditioned stimulus. So in this case, it would be the drool, drooling for food. And then we have the conditioned stimulus, which is the previously neutral stimulus, but now it elicits a response. So after conditioning, it becomes a conditioned stimulus. And then the conditioned response goes along with the conditioned stimulus. So it's the response to that stimulus. So this is what it looks like in the example. So you can see here that the unconditioned stimulus is the food, and then the response to the food is the unconditioned response. So the unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response go together. The neutral stimulus is the bell that does nothing. After conditioning, the bell becomes a conditioned stimulus, and then it elicits a conditioned response. And there are many examples of these. So this is used a lot in advertising. So for example, maybe seeing an attractive person can elicit some kind of positive emotion. And so in advertisements, what they'll do is they'll pair an attractive person with a product, maybe with a car or with a perfume. And then that's supposed to elicit the same positive reaction because you're making this association. You're still seeing that attractive person in this advertisement. Eventually, what the goal is that you've seen this over and over and over again, and so that product, so that car or that perfume, eventually will elicit a positive reaction just by itself. Or at least that's the hope of advertisement. Okay, so after Pavlov came Watson, and Watson contributed what he called a conditioned emotional response. So while Pavlov really only looked at observable behavior, so can we teach a dog to salivate, a physical behavior, Watson actually believed that we could actually condition emotions as well. So we can condition an emotion like fear to be our reaction to a neutral stimulus. So according to him, this is how phobias come about, and prejudices, likes, dislikes, love. It's all because of paired associations. So his famous experiment is called the Little Albert experiment. We'll watch that video shortly. Just to kind of give you a quick breakdown of what he does, he took an infant and presented him with a lot of different things. So fire, different animals, and he wasn't afraid of anything. The one thing that he was afraid of was a loud noise. So what he did was that he presented a white rat that didn't really cause any kind of reaction in the infant, and then he paired it with the loud noise, so it scared him. And he did this over and over and over again until eventually the loud noise was no longer needed. The infant became afraid of the white rat by itself. This experiment can't be done nowadays. It's actually considered unethical because you're developing phobias in that manner. But it did show that we condition emotions as well, not just behavior. So let's watch that video now.
But not everyone believes that biology is destiny. For many scientists, it's your experiences in life that count. Your upbringing, your education, your environment. Chief among these scientists is psychologist John Watson, who offers a theory that is the mirror opposite of eugenics.
This was the heyday of hereditarians and geneticists who said that human beings were constrained by their genetic inheritance. And Watson was saying that this is baloney, that human beings were shaped solely by their environment.
Over the years, Watson studies the behavior of babies, hundreds of them. To Watson, we arrive in the world a blank slate, tabula rasa. Nearly everything is learned, even things we think are instinctual, like fear. To prove that environment is more powerful than genetics, Watson designs an experiment for an infant known as Little Albert. He's so confident, he films it for posterity. At first, Albert shows little fear, even when Watson places a burning newspaper in front of him. Albert is also unafraid when he encounters a white rat for the first time in his life. But then, Watson shows Albert the rat accompanied by a loud clanging noise. One of the few things that upsets little Albert. And he does it again. And does it again. Eventually, Albert learns to fear not just the rat, but all furry things, even without the loud noise. In Watson's mind, the Little Albert experiment is a success because it proves that fears are learned, not inherited.